Long before the first stone temples crowned the hills of Mesopotamia, long before the Nile carried the burdens of pharaohs and priests, humanity existed as a scattered, fragile presence across the savannas, forests, and coastlines of Africa. Here, in the cradle of our species, Homo sapiens emerged approximately 300,000 years ago, not as rulers of the earth, but as observers, wanderers, and survivors. They were small, vulnerable, and yet gifted with a spark that would one day remake the planet: consciousness. They watched the herds, listened to the winds, and learned to read the signs of the natural world. They began to manipulate their environment, shaping it in subtle but profound ways, forging the first tools that would become extensions of their own bodies. Stone flakes, bone awls, and wooden spears each represented a cognitive leap, a grasp of cause and effect, a vision of a future where survival could be guided by ingenuity rather than mere instinct. Across the vast expanse of Africa, humans moved in small groups, following seasonal rains, the migration of animals, and the cycles of the sun and moon. They learned fire, not only for warmth or cooking, but as a social tool, a means of transforming the night into a space of storytelling, ritual, and strategy. Around these flickering flames, humans shared knowledge and culture. They began to communicate, first in gestures and cries, later in language that allowed abstract thought, planning, and the passing of wisdom across generations. The first songs, the earliest chants, and perhaps the first stories were born in these moments, as humans sought to understand themselves and the world around them. Yet the world was neither static nor forgiving. Ice ages swept across continents, pushing humans into refuges, forcing adaptation, and shaping migration patterns that would ripple through the millennia. Rising and falling sea levels opened and closed land bridges, connecting Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, allowing our ancestors to venture into Asia, Europe, and eventually the islands of the Pacific. In these encounters with new lands, humans confronted predators, unknown climates, and rival hominins. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Central Asia, were not merely obstacles or curiosities. They interbred with Homo sapiens, leaving traces in modern DNA. Today, nearly all non-African humans carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, and some populations in Asia carry Denisovan genes, evidence that early human history was not linear but entangled, a complex web of migration, adaptation, and exchange. The dawn of humanity was also the dawn of mortality, disease, and scarcity. Small groups faced famine when rains failed, predators when herds dispersed, and conflict when resources overlapped. Survival required cooperation, planning, and innovation. Those who shared knowledge, cared for the sick, and learned from mistakes prospered. Those who did not often disappeared into the fossil record, leaving only hints of their presence: a flint tool, a burial site, a fossilized footprint pressed into ancient mud. Every innovation, from the first sharpened spear to the controlled fire to the rudimentary clothing crafted from hides, was a step toward civilization, laying foundations for settlements, agriculture, and the complex societies that would emerge tens of thousands of years later. But these early humans were not merely shaped by biology. They were profoundly shaped by the environment. The African savannas, the forests of Central Africa, and the coastal zones of the Indian Ocean were laboratories of survival. Groups developed diverse strategies. Some became persistent hunters, following herds with endurance and strategy. Others foraged for tubers, nuts, and shellfish, developing detailed knowledge of plants, tides, and seasonal rhythms. Knowledge of medicine, even rudimentary, emerged from observations of plant properties, and ritual practices hint at early religious thought. Burials, offerings, and symbolic artifacts demonstrate an awareness of mortality, community, and the unseen. By around 70,000 years ago, a confluence of factors, climatic shifts, population pressures, and perhaps cognitive breakthroughs, propelled humans out of Africa in a great exodus. These first waves moved along the coasts of the Arabian Peninsula into South Asia, eventually reaching Southeast Asia, Australia, and beyond. Simultaneously, groups moved into the Levant, Europe, and Central Asia, adapting to tundra, steppe, and forest. These migrations were perilous. Many lives were lost to cold, famine, or conflict with other hominins. Yet the survivors carried with them not only their genes but their cultures, their skills, their ways of seeing and manipulating the world. Along the way, humans invented the first symbolic systems, engraved markings, carved figurines, and later cave paintings that would endure tens of thousands of years, revealing a human desire not only to survive, but to communicate, to imagine, and to assert presence in an indifferent world. Interactions with other hominins were complex. Evidence suggests that Neanderthals and Denisovans were intelligent, capable of tool-making, symbolic thought, and perhaps rudimentary language. Homo sapiens did not simply replace them. They intermingled, exchanged knowledge, and competed for resources. The resulting gene flow shaped our biological adaptations to cold, immune system enhancements, and even high-altitude tolerance in some populations can be traced to these ancient encounters. The narrative of human evolution, therefore, is not one of solitary triumph, but of entangled species navigating survival together, leaving legacies that persist in modern humans. Social structures began to emerge in these early hunter-gatherer groups. Leadership was fluid, often based on skill, experience, or wisdom rather than inheritance. Roles were divided, often along lines of age, gender, or ability, but cooperation was paramount. Those who hunted, gathered, cared for children, or processed materials contributed to the collective survival. These early social bonds were reinforced through ritual, storytelling, and shared labor. Cultural norms began to solidify, forming the earliest social frameworks that would evolve into the structures of towns, kingdoms, and empires. During this period, humans also began to manipulate the landscape in subtle ways. Early evidence of controlled burning to manage vegetation, fishing techniques, and the creation of simple shelters demonstrates a growing understanding of cause and effect. Even without cities or writing, these communities laid the foundations of human civilization. They developed knowledge systems, technologies, and social organization that allowed them to thrive in diverse environments, from arid deserts to lush forests, from frozen tundras to tropical islands. By around 20,000 years ago, the first signs of ritualistic art and symbolic culture became widespread. Cave paintings in Lascaux, France, and Sulawesi, Indonesia, depict animals, humans, and abstract patterns. Burial practices, often with grave goods, suggest an early concern with the afterlife, social status, or spiritual belief. This demonstrates that from the very beginning, humans sought meaning beyond survival, crafting a shared worldview that transcended the immediate and connected individuals across time and space. The dawn of humanity, therefore, is not a story of conquest or empire, but of observation, experimentation, and adaptation. It is a story of human civilization in its earliest form, hunter-gatherers learning to manipulate their world, to cooperate, and to create culture. These small, mobile groups formed the genetic, cultural, and intellectual foundation for all societies that followed. From the control of fire to the first symbolic expressions, from migration to adaptation, this period shaped what it meant to be human. It is also a reminder that the seeds of civilization are universal. Every population of early humans carried the potential for agriculture, urbanization, and empire. Some groups would eventually settle, cultivate, and innovate, while others remained mobile, preserving alternative paths of human survival. These varied strategies illustrate the diverse trajectories of human development, emphasizing that civilization is not a singular, linear story, but a tapestry of adaptive ingenuity across time and space. By studying this earliest chapter, we understand not only where we come from, but also the principles that govern human societies: cooperation, innovation, and cultural transmission. These principles would later underpin the rise of agriculture, cities, empires, and global trade. They are embedded in our DNA, in our social instincts, and in the enduring stories and symbols humans have created for tens of millennia. As this first segment closes, it becomes clear that the story of human civilization begins not with kings or empires, but with the fragile, brilliant spark of early Homo sapiens, a species capable of reshaping the world through curiosity, culture, and collaboration. This is the beginning of the entire history of human civilization, a journey that will carry us from the fires of African savannas to the digital age, spanning continents, societies, and millennia. The story of human civilization advances not through conquest or kingship, but through a quieter, yet infinitely more transformative revolution: the domestication of plants and animals. Around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, humans across the world faced a critical juncture. For tens of thousands of years, their survival had depended on mobility, tracking herds, gathering edible plants, and adapting to seasonal shifts. Yet as populations grew and climates stabilized after the last ice age, these scattered hunter-gatherer bands began to experiment with a radically different way of life: agriculture. In the fertile floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates, communities began cultivating wheat and barley. The rivers, which once dictated migration patterns, became arteries of settlement and trade. Simultaneously, along the banks of the Nile, ancient Egyptians experimented with the cultivation of emmer wheat and barley, learning to harness the river's annual inundations to enrich the soil. Across the mountains and river valleys of China, millet and later rice became staple crops, cultivated in organized plots and irrigated fields. In Mesoamerica, the domestication of maize, beans, and squash transformed societies that had long relied on foraging. Africa, too, witnessed the domestication of yams, sorghum, and millet, setting the stage for the future kingdoms of West Africa. Even in regions as remote as the Pacific Islands, early communities developed unique agricultural systems adapted to volcanic soils, terracing, and limited freshwater sources. The adoption of agriculture was far more than a technical innovation. It reshaped human society, biology, and culture. Settlements began to form, sometimes numbering in the hundreds or thousands, marking the first towns in human history. In these settlements, social hierarchies began to crystallize. Some individuals specialized in crafting tools, building homes, or weaving textiles. Others became leaders or ritual specialists. Surpluses of food allowed for a degree of social stratification previously impossible in purely mobile bands. The very notion of ownership and inheritance began to emerge. Fertile land became a source of wealth, and disputes over resources necessitated systems of negotiation, rules, and eventually law. The Neolithic villages of this period reveal remarkable ingenuity. Archaeological sites such as Catalhuyuk in modern-day Turkey illustrate early urban planning. Clustered houses, shared walls, and complex layouts designed to facilitate social interaction while maintaining individual privacy. Storage spaces, granaries, and communal areas reflect the careful management of surplus and food security. In the Indus Valley, early settlements like Mehrgarh display some of the first evidence of planned streets, storage facilities, and standardized pottery. Meanwhile, in the fertile valleys of China, early rice cultivation not only demanded irrigation techniques, but also coordinated labor, fostering communal decision-making and cooperation. Agriculture also intensified humanity's relationship with the environment. The same rivers that nourished crops could flood and destroy settlements. Droughts could decimate harvests, forcing migrations or social upheaval. Early humans experimented with soil management, crop rotation, and controlled burning to enhance fertility. These interventions reveal an emerging ecological awareness, a recognition that human survival was inextricably linked to the rhythms of the natural world. The domestication of animals, sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, and later horses and camels, further transformed societies. Livestock provided not only food, but labor, materials for clothing, and even status symbols in early economies. Humans began shaping species to their needs, selecting traits over generations, and establishing patterns of coevolution that persist today. Yet agriculture was not a universal or instantaneous solution. Some groups retained hunting, foraging, and pastoralism, creating hybrid economies that blended mobility with cultivation. These societies demonstrate that civilization was not linear, and that multiple trajectories of human survival and advancement coexisted. Indeed, pastoralist societies, from the steppes of Eurasia to the Sahel in Africa, maintained mobility and resilience, contributing innovations such as mounted warfare, trade networks, and trans-regional knowledge transfer. With permanent settlements came new challenges and opportunities. Disease, previously sporadic in small mobile bands, became endemic in denser populations. Parasites, contaminated water, and proximity to livestock introduced new health risks, shaping immune systems and social practices. Burial customs evolved, reflecting both ritual and pragmatic concerns, while the accumulation of material wealth prompted shifts in social norms, inheritance, and gender dynamics. Archaeological evidence from the Levant, the Yangtze, and the Andes shows that women often played central roles in agriculture, food processing, and ritual life, underscoring the complex division of labor in early civilizations. Trade networks expanded rapidly during this period, even before the rise of formal empires. Surplus grains, flint, obsidian, shells, and beads were exchanged across regions, facilitating both economic and cultural exchange. Communities along rivers and coasts became hubs of interaction, connecting distant regions and spreading knowledge of crops, techniques, and ritual practices. These exchanges laid the groundwork for later civilizations, where commerce, diplomacy, and cultural transmission would become central forces in global history. The material culture of early agricultural societies reveals both practical and symbolic innovation. Pottery, initially utilitarian, became a medium for artistic expression, reflecting identity, ritual, and social status. Looms and textile production emerged, enabling clothing that reflected both utility and aesthetic choices. The development of grinding stones, plows, and irrigation systems illustrates not only technical skill, but an increasingly sophisticated understanding of engineering, hydrology, and ecology. Religion and ritual were deeply intertwined with agriculture. Early humans recognized the dependency of their survival on forces beyond their control: the rising sun, the fertility of the soil, the cycles of rain. Shrines, figurines, and ritual offerings suggest that they sought to influence these forces to ensure harvests and to commemorate the cycles of life and death. Fertility symbols, ancestor worship, and ceremonial architecture became central aspects of social cohesion, reinforcing community identity and shared values. Perhaps most importantly, agriculture catalyzed cultural memory and narrative. Settlements became repositories of accumulated knowledge, where techniques, rituals, and stories could be preserved and transmitted. Early forms of proto-writing, pictographs, tokens, and marks on clay emerged as methods to record grain surpluses, trade, and ritual activities. These developments foreshadowed the complex writing systems of later civilizations, from cuneiform in Mesopotamia to hieroglyphs in Egypt, demonstrating a continuum of human innovation. The diversity of agricultural practices reflects the ingenuity and adaptability of early humans. In highland regions, terrace farming mitigated erosion and maximized arable land. In arid regions, early irrigation systems channeled water to sustain crops. In floodplains, communities learned to predict seasonal inundations and align their planting cycles accordingly. This adaptability demonstrates that early agriculture was not a static invention, but a series of experiments and local solutions tailored to the environment, population density, and social structure. By around 8,000 years ago, these early agricultural communities had given rise to some of the first proto-cities and ceremonial centers. Jericho, Catalhoyuk, and Banpo represent settlements where architecture, ritual, and communal planning converged. These sites reveal that civilization emerges not solely from conquest or empire, but from cooperation, experimentation, and adaptation. Agriculture was the engine of this transformation, converting mobile bands into permanent communities capable of producing surplus, sustaining specialized labor, and fostering cultural complexity. In sum, the agricultural revolution was not merely a change in subsistence. It was a profound turning point in human civilization, reshaping biology, society, culture, and the environment. It laid the foundation for urbanization, social hierarchies, trade, writing, and the eventual rise of empires. It demonstrates that human ingenuity, collaboration, and adaptation were central to our species' ability to thrive, creating the first enduring communities from which all subsequent civilizations would emerge. The story of agriculture is thus the story of civilization itself, a transformation as quiet as it was monumental, shaping the lives of farmers, artisans, and leaders alike, and setting humanity on a path from scattered settlements to the sprawling civilizations that would follow. Civilization, in its earliest recognizable form, begins where humans chose to settle and organize in permanent communities, where the surpluses of agriculture could support specialized labor, and where governance, trade, and ritual emerged to regulate life. By roughly 6,000 years ago, humanity's scattered settlements began to converge along the world's great rivers, transforming from villages into cities, and from simple communities into complex civilizations. These river valley civilizations, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Yellow River in China, formed the foundation of human urban history. Yet the story of urbanization was not confined to these well-known centers. From Norte Chico in Peru to the Jaman culture in Japan, humans demonstrated that complex organization could emerge under diverse environmental and cultural conditions. In Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, scattered farming villages evolved into the first urban centers, like Uruk and Uar. The rivers provided fertile silt for agriculture, but also demanded new forms of cooperation. Floods could destroy entire fields, requiring organized labor to maintain canals, dikes, and irrigation systems. To manage these challenges, humans developed early forms of governance and bureaucracies. Priests and rulers oversaw water distribution, recorded grain surpluses, and mediated disputes, while armies defended cities from raiders and rival settlements. Writing emerged in this context not as art, but as a practical tool to track trade, ownership, and obligations. The earliest cuneiform tablets, clay imprints of pictographs, preserved information about goods, labor, and legal codes, allowing societies to administer increasingly complex economies and populations. Meanwhile, along the Nile, Egypt's river valleys offered stability and predictability absent in Mesopotamia. The annual inundation fertilized the land, creating agricultural abundance. Egyptian pharaohs centralized authority, not only to oversee irrigation and agriculture, but to coordinate monumental construction projects, from pyramids to temples. These structures were more than tombs or shrines. They embodied the integration of religion, labor, governance, and culture. Writing, in the form of hieroglyphs, recorded history, laws, and religious practice, preserving the knowledge and ideology of a civilization that endured for millennia. Ordinary people, farmers, artisans, and scribes participated in this network, sustaining the grandeur of the state while forging their own local communities, rituals, and identities. Across the Indus Valley, in settlements such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, urban planning reached an unprecedented sophistication. Streets were laid out in grids, with standardized building materials and drainage systems demonstrating advanced engineering. Wells and public baths indicate attention to sanitation and community well-being. Trade extended far beyond the river valleys, reaching Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Persian Gulf, exchanging raw materials, luxury goods, and cultural practices. The Indus script, still undeciphered, hints at the complex social, economic, and ritual life of these cities. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, power may have been more diffused, emphasizing collective organization and civic responsibility rather than centralized kingship. In China, along the Yellow River, the Shang dynasty introduced one of the world's earliest known writing systems through inscriptions on oracle bones. The Shang built palaces, fortifications, and ritual sites, while metallurgical and bronze casting enabled both tools and weapons of unprecedented complexity. Cities were not merely administrative centers. They were spiritual and cultural hubs, where ritual, governance, and daily life converged. Innovations in astronomy, mathematics, and calendrical systems allowed society to plan agricultural cycles, align rituals, and predict celestial events, demonstrating the intimate link between human survival, observation, and intellectual advancement. Beyond the great rivers, early urbanization followed multiple paths. Norte Chico in coastal Peru, for example, developed monumental architecture without evidence of pottery or writing, relying instead on quipu-like recording systems, labor mobilization, and monumental ceremonial structures. Similarly, the Jaman culture in Japan achieved long-term sedentism with complex pottery, ritual sites, and social organization, illustrating that civilization is not a single formula, but a spectrum of human ingenuity. These societies challenge the notion that writing, kingship, or monumental architecture are prerequisites for advanced social organization. Rather, they show that culture, labor, and ritual can produce sustainable urban life in diverse ecological contexts. Trade networks were central to the flourishing of river valley civilizations. Rivers and coastlines facilitated transport, while early roads and caravan routes connected distant settlements. Mesopotamian cities exchanged textiles, grains, and metals with the Indus Valley. Egyptian gold and papyrus traveled along the Nile and across the Mediterranean. Chinese jade and silk found their way to Central Asia. These networks were conduits not just for material goods, but for ideas, technologies, religious practices, and cultural norms. Urbanization, then, was never isolated. It was part of a web of interaction, linking humans across hundreds, even thousands, of kilometers. The rise of cities also brought new social dynamics and hierarchies. Leadership often rested on military, religious, or bureaucratic authority, and elites accumulated wealth through control of land, labor, and trade. Yet ordinary citizens, farmers, artisans, scribes, and merchants played essential roles. Their labor produced the surpluses that sustained cities, their knowledge guided agriculture and craft, and their creativity shaped the culture and identity of the civilization. Even in early cities, the interdependence of rulers and populace, administrators and laborers, artisans and consumers, illustrates the complex social fabric that underpins all enduring civilizations. Technology and craft flourished alongside urbanization. Pottery, weaving, metallurgy, and construction advanced rapidly. In Mesopotamia, bronze tools revolutionized agriculture and warfare. In Egypt, stone-cutting techniques enabled the construction of massive monuments. In the Indus Valley, standardized weights and measures facilitated trade and taxation. These innovations demonstrate that civilization is as much about human ingenuity as it is about political power. Knowledge accumulated, refined, and transmitted across generations, forming the intellectual backbone of human progress. Religion, ritual, and symbolic expression were inseparable from urban life. Temples, shrines, and ritual artifacts anchored cities spiritually, while festivals and ceremonies reinforced social cohesion. Writing and iconography conveyed religious doctrine, social norms, and historical memory. In Egypt, the pharaoh was divine, mediating between gods and humans. In Mesopotamia, city-states venerated patron deities. In the Indus Valley, evidence of ritual baths and figurines suggests an integration of daily life and spiritual practice. These practices were not mere decoration. They structured society, justified authority, and codified moral and cultural values. Environmental management was another hallmark of early cities. Irrigation canals, levees, and reservoirs illustrate a sophisticated understanding of hydrology. Urban centers had to balance the demands of agriculture, defense, sanitation, and construction. Failure to manage these systems could bring famine, disease, or social unrest, highlighting the fragility of early urban life. Civilizations that thrived were those that combined technological innovation, social cohesion, and environmental awareness, creating cities capable of enduring through generations. By examining river valley civilizations, we see the full complexity of early urban life. It was a period of experimentation, adaptation, and interconnection. Some cities would endure for centuries. Others would vanish under sand, silt, or neglect. Yet all contributed to the cumulative knowledge of humanity, from governance and trade to craft, ritual, and writing. Civilization was no longer simply survival. It was mastery of the environment, social organization, and cultural expression. In conclusion, the rise of the first cities and river valley civilizations marks humanity's transition from scattered, semi-nomadic bands to organized, complex societies capable of sustained growth, innovation, and cultural production. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China demonstrate the diversity of solutions humans devised to the challenges of food production, social organization, trade, and spiritual life. Across continents, even in societies without writing or monumental architecture, humans found ways to coordinate labor, sustain populations, and transmit knowledge. These early urban centers laid the foundation of human civilization, shaping patterns of governance, trade, culture, and technology that would echo throughout history. The story of the first cities teaches a vital lesson. Civilization is not a monolith, nor a product of conquest alone. It is the product of cooperation, adaptation, and cultural innovation. Every stone wall, granary, and written tablet tells the story of humans striving to organize themselves, to understand the world, and to leave a legacy beyond the fleeting span of an individual life. It is here, in these earliest cities, that the narrative of human civilization begins to take the shape we recognize today, a network of interconnected societies capable of producing knowledge, art, governance, and culture at a scale previously unimaginable. By the first millennium BCE, the scattered cities and river valleys of the world had begun to coalesce into something larger, more complex, and far-reaching: empires. Unlike the earlier city-states of Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley, which often rose and fell in isolation, classical empires dominated vast territories, connected distant peoples, and established governance systems that could endure centuries. Yet empires were not merely structures of power. They were engines of culture, trade, innovation, and human experience. They intertwined the lives of rulers, soldiers, farmers, artisans, merchants, and philosophers in ways that reshaped the trajectory of human civilization. In Greece, the classical era produced a civilization that would leave an indelible mark on law, philosophy, art, and science. The city-states Athens, Sparta, and Corinth were political laboratories, experimenting with forms of governance from oligarchy to early democracy. Citizens engaged in public debate, military service, and civic responsibility, while thinkers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle explored questions of ethics, politics, and knowledge. Greek culture, while often focused on elites, depended on the labor of countless farmers, craftsmen, and traders who sustained the polis. Trade connected Greek cities across the Aegean, linking them with Egypt, Phoenicia, and Anatolia, spreading goods, ideas, and innovations. Even in times of war, such as the Persian invasions, the interconnectivity of Greek city-states and their allies shaped the outcome of battles and the development of civic identity. To the west, Rome transformed urban planning, law, and administration into a model of empire that would endure for centuries. Rome's roads, aqueducts, and public buildings facilitated not only governance but the movement of armies, trade, and culture. Roman law codified justice, property rights, and civic duty, establishing principles that would influence societies millennia later. Yet Rome was more than its emperors or senators. It was the collective labor of farmers cultivating the Tiber Valley, artisans producing pottery and tools, merchants trading grain and olive oil, and slaves performing essential tasks. Cultural assimilation and local governance allowed Rome to manage diverse peoples across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, creating a network of cities that were both local and imperial. In the Persian Empire, vast territories spanning from the Indus Valley to the Aegean were united under sophisticated administration. The Achaemenid kings established satrapies, regional provinces governed by local rulers accountable to the central authority, ensuring efficient taxation, law, and military readiness. Roads like the Royal Road facilitated communication and trade across thousands of kilometers, connecting people and ideas. Persia demonstrates that empires were not solely about conquest. They were experiments in organization, integration, and cultural exchange, balancing the authority of rulers with local traditions and identities. In the Indian subcontinent, the Maurya and later Gupta empires exemplified the integration of governance, culture, and economic management. Chandragupta Maurya established a centralized authority supported by a bureaucracy capable of collecting taxes, maintaining roads, and overseeing trade. Ashoka, his grandson, promoted Buddhism and moral governance, inscribing edicts that emphasized justice, welfare, and spiritual responsibility. Later, the Gupta dynasty oversaw a period of scientific, artistic, and mathematical flourishing, producing advances in astronomy, medicine, and literature that would influence not only India but the broader world through trade and intellectual exchange. Han China similarly demonstrated the potential of a bureaucratic, centralized empire. The Han dynasty implemented standardized laws, weights, measures, and currency, facilitating trade and governance across vast territories. Confucian philosophy informed both social norms and official administration, emphasizing duty, education, and moral governance. The Silk Road emerged as both a literal and symbolic artery of exchange, transmitting silk, spices, metals, and ideas from China to Central Asia and beyond. Science, mathematics, metallurgy, and engineering thrived under imperial stability, while rural communities continued to cultivate crops and maintain social cohesion. Classical empires, despite their grandeur, depended fundamentally on ordinary people. Farmers fed the cities, artisans, architects, and scribes sustained infrastructure and culture. Soldiers and laborers defended territory and constructed monumental projects. Every empire, no matter how powerful, was ultimately a network of interdependent communities where success and longevity required both effective governance and the daily participation of millions. This interdependence underscores a fundamental principle of civilization. Empires are more than rulers. They are living, evolving systems shaped by the contributions of countless individuals. Trade was not simply economic. It was a vector of cultural transmission. Goods carried along the Silk Road, the Mediterranean, and the Indian Ocean transported languages, technologies, religions, and art. Greek mathematical ideas reached India. Indian numerals and mathematics traveled west. Chinese silk reached Rome. Middle Eastern spices reached India and Europe. These exchanges created a shared human heritage, where civilizations were interconnected through commerce, travel, and intellectual engagement. Religion and philosophy played pivotal roles in shaping empires. Zoroastrianism in Persia provided ethical frameworks that guided governance. Buddhism and Hinduism in India influenced law, social norms, and education. Confucianism in China structured family and state relations. Greek philosophy and mystery religions informed ethics, politics, and scientific inquiry. Ideas were as powerful as armies, influencing not only governance, but daily life, moral conduct, and cultural identity. Through these frameworks, empires sought cohesion, legitimacy, and long-term stability. Despite their achievements, classical empires faced immense challenges. Environmental factors, floods, droughts, and soil depletion threatened agricultural surpluses and urban stability. Population pressures created social tension. Revolts and invasions tested military and administrative capacity. Disease spread rapidly in dense urban centers, periodically decimating populations. Political succession often sparked conflict, demonstrating that centralized authority, while powerful, was inherently fragile. Yet in responding to these challenges, empires refined governance, infrastructure, and cultural resilience, creating systems that could endure far longer than their founders may have imagined. The cultural and technological innovations of classical empires resonate through history. Rome's roads became the infrastructure of later European states. Han bureaucracy inspired imperial systems across East Asia, Indian numerals, and mathematics laid the groundwork for global science. Greek philosophy influenced law, science, and political theory for millennia. These empires demonstrate the interplay between centralized authority, local autonomy, technological innovation, and cultural exchange, a dynamic that remains central to human civilization today. Classical empires also reveal the limits of power. Despite vast armies, wealth, and cultural achievement, no empire could indefinitely withstand environmental pressures, internal dissent, or external invasions. The Persian Empire fell to Alexander the Great. Rome succumbed to internal decay and barbarian incursions. Han China fractured under political turmoil and rebellion. Yet, even in collapse, these empires transmitted knowledge, infrastructure, and culture, influencing the civilizations that followed. The ruins of cities, the remnants of texts, and the persistence of ideas demonstrate that human achievement is cumulative, built upon the successes and failures of those who came before. Beyond the elites, ordinary people lived complex, dynamic lives. Artisans produced pottery, textiles, and tools. Merchants navigated local and long-distance trade. Farmers managed crops and irrigation. Religious practitioners maintained rituals and moral authority. Daily life, from the grain markets of Rome to the canals of Chang'an, was structured by economic, cultural, and environmental systems. Understanding the classical era requires acknowledging this interplay of labor, governance, and culture, a recognition that civilization is never solely the story of rulers. In conclusion, the classical empires of Greece, Rome, Persia, India, and China represent a peak in early human organization, connecting vast territories, fostering cultural and technological innovation, and creating social and economic systems that endured for centuries. They illustrate the interdependence of rulers and populace, the fragility of centralized power, and the enduring impact of culture, trade, and knowledge. Through these empires, humanity learned not only to dominate territory, but to manage complexity, preserve knowledge, and transmit culture across generations. The legacy of classical empires continues to shape the modern world. They provide enduring examples of governance, urbanization, economic networks, philosophical inquiry, and cultural transmission. The lessons of their rise and fall remind us that civilization is an ongoing process, dependent on adaptation, cooperation, and the daily contributions of countless individuals. From the agora of Athens to the palaces of Chang'an, from the trade routes of Persia to the roads of Rome, these empires form a critical chapter in the story of human civilization, a chapter defined by ambition, innovation, and the complex interplay between human ingenuity and the forces of history. While history is often told through the lens of Mediterranean or Eurasian empires, humanity's story is far broader, richer, and more complex. Across Africa, the Americas, and Oceania, non-Western civilizations flourished, demonstrating remarkable ingenuity, cultural depth, and technological achievement long before European colonial expansion. These societies were not peripheral or preparatory. They were fully realized civilizations, each pursuing unique trajectories shaped by environment, resources, and human creativity. In West Africa, civilizations such as the Nok culture, circa 1000 BCE, 300 CE, pioneered ironworking centuries before Europe. The Nok crafted intricate terracotta sculptures, reflecting spiritual beliefs and social organization, while simultaneously developing metallurgical techniques that transformed agriculture and warfare. Centuries later, the empires of Mali, Ghana, and Songhai commanded vast wealth through trade in gold, salt, and other commodities. Cities like Timbuktu became intellectual and cultural hubs, where scholars preserved and produced manuscripts on theology, law, astronomy, and medicine. The Trans-Saharan Trade Network connected these empires to North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond, illustrating that Africa was not isolated, but deeply integrated into global flows of commerce and knowledge. In southern Africa, Great Zimbabwe emerged as a center of trade, craft, and political organization between the 11th and 15th centuries. Its massive stone enclosures, built without mortar, stand as a testament to engineering skill, social coordination, and aesthetic sensibility. The city's prosperity derived from both agriculture and trade, including links to the Indian Ocean world. Gold, ivory, and exotic goods moved along these networks, showing that African civilizations developed complex economies, political systems, and cultural identities independent of Western influence. Across the Americas, civilizations advanced in strikingly different ways. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec, Maya, and later Aztec societies developed mathematics, astronomy, and architecture without the wheel or draft animals. The Maya created complex calendars, hieroglyphic writing, and monumental city-states, demonstrating a profound understanding of celestial cycles, agriculture, and urban planning. Engineering feats included stepped pyramids, sophisticated drainage systems, and terraced agriculture, allowing dense populations to thrive in challenging landscapes. Trade connected city-states across vast distances, circulating cacao, obsidian, textiles, and ritual artifacts. In the Andes, the Inca Empire achieved logistical and administrative sophistication unparalleled in the Americas, constructing roads and bridges across mountains and implementing state-run agriculture and storage systems that supported large populations. In Oceania, Pacific Islanders navigated thousands of kilometers of open ocean to settle the islands of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. Using the stars, ocean currents, and wind patterns, these communities established societies on isolated atolls and volcanic islands, developing agriculture, aquaculture, and social hierarchies adapted to limited land and resources. Their navigation, settlement, and ecological management reflect highly specialized knowledge systems, demonstrating that civilization does not require continental scale or monumental architecture. It requires adaptation, social coordination, and innovation. The technological, social, and cultural achievements of non-Western civilizations often rivaled or exceeded those in the classical Mediterranean or Eurasian world. Ironworking in Africa, terracing in the Andes, calendrical systems in Mesoamerica, and seafaring across the Pacific reveal that humans across the globe pursued sophisticated solutions to environmental and social challenges. These civilizations produced art, literature, and spiritual systems reflecting deep engagement with the natural world, society, and cosmology. They also developed networks of knowledge transmission, astronomical observations guided agriculture, metallurgical innovations enhanced tools and weapons, ritual and myth codified social norms and cultural memory. Trade was a unifying factor. Long-distance exchange existed not only within Africa or the Americas, but across continents. African gold and ivory reached Mediterranean and Middle Eastern markets, while maize, cacao, and potatoes from the Americas eventually transformed Eurasian diets and economies. Pacific Islanders exchanged obsidian, shells, and textiles across islands, creating regional networks of wealth and cultural cohesion. These interactions illustrate that non-Western civilizations were dynamic participants in broader human history, not isolated or static societies. Religion and philosophy were integral to societal cohesion and innovation. In West Africa, spiritual beliefs underpinned social hierarchy, ritual, and governance. The Maya and Inca linked astronomy, ritual, and agriculture, aligning temples and agricultural calendars with celestial events. Pacific Islanders maintained spiritual practices that guided navigation, resource management, and social order. Across these civilizations, religion was inseparable from governance, economics, and daily life, demonstrating a holistic understanding of human existence and the environment. Social organization in non-Western civilizations was diverse and adaptive. Some, like the Maya or Inca, centralized authority under kings or priests. Others, like Polynesian chiefdoms or some African societies, distributed power among clans or councils. Gender roles were flexible, often shaped by ecological and economic imperatives. Women in the Americas cultivated crops, managed domestic economies, and contributed to ritual and craft. Men participated in long-distance trade, construction, and warfare. Across all these societies, social cohesion depended on cooperation, ritual, and shared cultural frameworks, highlighting human ingenuity in organizing complex societies without relying on external models. Environmental adaptation was another hallmark. In Africa, irrigation and terracing mitigated seasonal fluctuations. In the Andes, high-altitude agriculture relied on terraced fields and frost-resistant crops. In Mesoamerica, chinampas, artificial floating gardens, sustained dense urban populations. Pacific Islanders managed limited resources with sustainable fishing, agroforestry, and land management techniques. These adaptations illustrate that human civilization is deeply intertwined with environmental knowledge and ecological stewardship, reinforcing the principle that survival and prosperity depend on understanding and manipulating the natural world. The art and material culture of non-Western civilizations provides insight into identity, belief, and innovation. Terracotta, stone carvings, textiles, ceramics, and monumental architecture reveal aesthetic sophistication and social symbolism. Writing and proto-writing systems, from Maya glyphs to quipu in the Andes, encoded economic, political, and ritual information, reflecting sophisticated abstract thought. Even in societies without writing, oral traditions preserved history, law, and cosmology, demonstrating that civilization is as much about ideas as it is about material infrastructure. Non-Western civilizations also contributed scientific and mathematical knowledge. The Maya calculated solar and lunar cycles with remarkable precision. African ironworkers developed techniques to produce high-quality steel. Polynesian navigators charted open ocean voyages without compasses, and Andean engineers manipulated water, stone, and terrain to sustain populations. These achievements reveal that knowledge and innovation were universal human endeavors, arising in response to environmental, social, and cultural challenges. Despite their accomplishments, many non-Western civilizations were later disrupted or overlooked in historical narratives, particularly during the European colonial expansion. Diseases, conquest, forced labor, and cultural suppression altered the trajectory of these societies. Yet their legacies persist in architecture, agriculture, knowledge systems, languages, and genetic heritage. Recognizing these civilizations not only corrects historical oversight, but also provides a more accurate and complete picture of human civilization as a global, interconnected process. In conclusion, the flourishing of non-Western civilizations demonstrates that human achievement cannot be measured by the presence of written history or monumental architecture alone. Across Africa, the Americas, and Oceania, humans developed complex societies, technologies, and cultural systems independently and often in parallel with Eurasian civilizations. These societies contributed profoundly to trade, science, governance, and the arts, enriching the human story and challenging the notion that civilization was the exclusive domain of the Mediterranean or Asian heartlands. The history of humanity, therefore, is a mosaic of diverse achievements, interconnected through migration, trade, and shared knowledge. By examining non-Western civilizations, we understand that the trajectory of human civilization is multifaceted, adaptive, and universal, shaped not by a single culture, but by the cumulative ingenuity of societies across continents. From iron smelting in Nigeria to maize cultivation in Mesoamerica, from Polynesian navigation to Andean engineering, the legacy of these civilizations continues to inform, inspire, and connect us to the broader story of humanity. As human societies evolved, they not only cultivated land, built cities, and forged empires, but they also sought meaning, understanding, and frameworks to navigate the complexities of life. Across continents, humans turned inward and outward simultaneously, developing religions, philosophies, and knowledge networks that would shape thought, governance, and culture for millennia. These intellectual and spiritual endeavors were not peripheral. They were central to the endurance, cohesion, and adaptability of civilizations, influencing law, education, trade, and diplomacy. In South Asia, the philosophies of Hinduism and Buddhism emerged as profound frameworks for understanding existence. Hinduism, with its intricate pantheon, rituals, and concepts of dharma and karma, offered a comprehensive moral and social system. Temples became centers of learning, governance, and community activity, while the caste system, despite its rigidity, structured labor, social obligations, and education. Buddhism, in contrast, spread initially as a philosophy emphasizing ethical conduct, meditation, and the alleviation of suffering. Monastic communities became centers of scholarship, translating oral traditions into written texts, preserving and disseminating knowledge. Pilgrimage routes and monastic networks facilitated cultural and intellectual exchange, connecting India with Central and East Asia. In the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, and later Islam emerged as guiding frameworks for law, morality, and governance. Judaism codified centuries of oral traditions into texts such as the Torah, shaping laws, ethics, and social norms. Christianity, evolving from Jewish traditions, extended these principles, spreading through the Roman Empire and beyond, influencing philosophy, art, and governance. Islam, beginning in the 7th century CE, not only unified vast territories under a religious framework, but also fostered intellectual growth. Islamic civilization established centers of learning: Baghdad's House of Wisdom, Cairo's Al-Azhar, and Cordoba's libraries, where scholars translated and preserved Greek, Indian, and Persian knowledge. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy flourished under this network, illustrating that ideas can traverse and connect civilizations as effectively as armies or trade. In China, Confucianism, Taoism, and later Buddhism shaped both individual behavior and statecraft. Confucian philosophy emphasized hierarchy, filial piety, and ethical governance, forming the moral backbone of bureaucratic administration. Taoism explored harmony with nature, balance, and the metaphysical order, influencing art, medicine, and societal norms. The introduction of Buddhism from India created a dialogue between native and foreign ideas, fostering a syncretic intellectual culture. Chinese scholars developed encyclopedic knowledge, documenting history, agriculture, astronomy, and engineering, while civil service examinations institutionalized meritocracy and learning. Across Africa, spiritual and philosophical systems integrated daily life, governance, and social cohesion. In West Africa, oral traditions preserved laws, cosmologies, and histories, while ritual practices reinforced communal identity and morality. The Epic of Sundiata, recounting the founding of the Mali Empire, is both historical and didactic, illustrating the fusion of narrative, governance, and moral instruction. North African scholars preserved and expanded Greco-Roman knowledge, translating texts into Arabic and transmitting them across the Islamic world, demonstrating Africa's pivotal role in the global flow of ideas. In the Americas, religion and philosophy were deeply intertwined with environmental knowledge and social organization. The Maya aligned temples with celestial events, integrating astronomy, agriculture, and ritual into a cohesive worldview. The Inca codified knowledge through quipu, a system of knotted strings encoding census, resource, and administrative information. These civilizations demonstrate that intellectual sophistication does not require writing in the European sense, but rather systems for recording, transmitting, and interpreting knowledge. Trade routes were conduits not only for goods, but for ideas. The Silk Road connected China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, carrying silk, spices, metals, and philosophical and religious ideas. Buddhist texts traveled from India to China and Japan. Greek science and mathematics reached the Islamic world, preserved and enhanced in Arabic. Indian numerals and concepts of zero traveled westward, revolutionizing mathematics. Similarly, maritime trade in the Indian Ocean facilitated the exchange of knowledge, culture, and ritual between East Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and the Malay archipelago. Networks of knowledge were as tangible as the ships, roads, and caravans that carried them, shaping civilizations across continents. Education and scholarship became institutionalized in various forms. Monastic schools, academies, and libraries preserved and transmitted accumulated wisdom. Scholars compiled encyclopedias, codified laws, and recorded astronomical observations. In the Islamic world, scholars such as Al-Khwarizmi advanced algebra, Avicenna integrated Greek and Indian medicine, Alhazen revolutionized optics. In China, scholars preserved Confucian classics, documented history, and developed sophisticated technological manuals. In India, texts on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine codified knowledge across generations. These intellectual networks ensured that civilizations could innovate while maintaining continuity, a vital feature in an unpredictable world. Religion and philosophy were not static. They adapted to changing circumstances, local environments, and intercultural interactions. Hinduism and Buddhism evolved alongside regional kingdoms. Christianity and Islam incorporated local traditions. Confucianism was reinterpreted across dynasties. These adaptive qualities ensured that intellectual frameworks remained relevant, guiding societies through periods of expansion, conquest, and environmental change. The interplay between religion, philosophy, and governance illustrates a critical principle. Ideas shape power as profoundly as armies or empires. Moral codes justified rules, law codified obligations, and ritual reinforced social cohesion. Philosophical debates influenced policy, education, and ethics. Networks of knowledge allowed civilizations to integrate new technologies, solve practical problems, and preserve cultural memory. For instance, the transmission of papermaking and printing from China to the Islamic world and eventually Europe enabled the unprecedented dissemination of information, transforming education, administration, and culture. The legacy of religion and knowledge networks is also evident in cross-cultural synthesis. Greek philosophy was preserved and expanded in the Islamic world, then transmitted to Europe during the Renaissance. Indian mathematics influenced the Islamic Golden Age and later European science. Buddhist and Hindu ideas shaped Chinese, Korean, and Japanese thought. These interconnected intellectual currents reveal that human civilization is not the sum of isolated cultures, but a web of ideas, practices, and innovations spanning continents and centuries. Daily life in classical and non-Western civilizations was informed by these frameworks. Ritual calendars dictated agricultural cycles. Philosophical teachings informed ethical behavior. Medical knowledge guided healthcare. Architectural and engineering principles shaped urban planning. Knowledge networks ensured that innovations, be they mathematical techniques, metallurgical processes, or navigational tools, were preserved, adapted, and transmitted. Every technological advance, every ethical precept, and every written or oral record reinforced the cumulative nature of human civilization. In conclusion, religion, philosophy, and knowledge networks were the lifeblood of human civilization. They provided meaning, structure, and continuity. They enabled cultural and technological innovation, and they connected distant societies into a shared human story. From the monasteries of India to the libraries of Baghdad, from the observatories of China to the oral epics of Africa, humans demonstrated that survival and progress require not only material resources, but also intellectual and spiritual frameworks. The enduring lesson of this period is clear. Ideas are as potent as armies, trade routes, or empires. They can shape societies, sustain civilizations through upheaval, and link humans across vast distances. Religion, philosophy, and knowledge networks form a continuous thread through human history, a thread that binds ancient civilizations to the present, reminding us that civilization is ultimately a story of thought, meaning, and shared understanding. The medieval era is often mischaracterized as a dark age, particularly in European historiography. In reality, from roughly the 5th to the 15th century CE, civilizations across the globe were dynamic, interconnected, and innovative. While Europe experienced political fragmentation following the fall of the Western Roman Empire, other regions flourished in governance, commerce, intellectual production, and cultural exchange. This period demonstrates that human civilization cannot be measured solely by the lens of one continent, but must be understood as a complex network of societies, each adapting to local environments, leveraging knowledge networks, and engaging in global interactions. In Europe, the early medieval centuries saw the fragmentation of former Roman territories into kingdoms and principalities. Yet even amid political instability, trade, craftsmanship, and cultural synthesis persisted. Monastic communities preserved classical texts and developed new intellectual traditions. Gothic cathedrals and Romanesque churches were not merely architectural feats. They were centers of learning, social organization, and artistic expression. Medieval universities emerged in the 12th and 13th centuries, where scholars studied law, medicine, philosophy, and theology, laying the foundation for Europe's intellectual revival. Trade networks expanded along rivers, coasts, and overland routes, connecting the Mediterranean, North Sea, and Baltic regions, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technology. Meanwhile, across the Islamic world, the medieval era marked an unprecedented flowering of knowledge, governance, and commerce. The Abbasid Caliphate, 8th to 13th centuries, cultivated cities like Baghdad and Cordoba as hubs of scholarship, trade, and cultural synthesis. Scholars translated Greek, Indian, and Persian texts, advancing mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and engineering. Algebra, trigonometry, and optics were refined. Hospitals, observatories, and libraries became centers of innovation. Trade networks stretched from the Middle East to Africa, Central Asia, South Asia, and Europe, creating a web of cultural and economic interaction that rivaled any other region in the world. Islamic art, architecture, and scholarship demonstrate that the medieval period was one of profound intellectual and cultural achievement, not stagnation. In Africa, empires such as Mali and Songhai showcased sophisticated governance, wealth, and scholarship. Timbuktu and Jin became renowned centers of learning, where libraries preserved thousands of manuscripts on law, theology, medicine, and astronomy. The trans-Saharan trade connected West Africa to the Mediterranean and the Middle East, facilitating the movement of gold, salt, slaves, and ideas. Cities were planned and organized, demonstrating that urbanization, infrastructure, and governance were thriving far beyond Europe. Social cohesion relied on ritual, law, and shared cultural values, while African societies engaged in technological innovation, craft production, and long-distance commerce. In China, dynasties like the Tang, 618 to 907 CE, and Song, 960 to 1279 CE, presided over periods of unparalleled urban, technological, and cultural growth. Cities like Chang'an and Kaifeng were centers of trade, bureaucracy, and cosmopolitan culture. Printing, gunpowder, compass technology, and agricultural innovations transformed society, allowing dense populations to flourish. Confucian bureaucracy and examination systems maintained governance efficiency while fostering intellectual continuity. Trade along the Silk Road and maritime networks integrated China into a broader Afro-Eurasian system, enabling the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Chinese art, literature, and scientific achievement illustrate that the medieval period was one of global creativity and connectivity. In Mesoamerica, civilizations such as the Maya and later the Aztec continued to develop urban centers, monumental architecture, and complex agricultural systems. Calendrical systems and astronomical observations guided agriculture, ritual, and civic life. Trade networks linked city-states across vast distances, circulating obsidian, cacao, feathers, and textiles. In the Andes, the Wari and later Inca civilizations developed terracing, irrigation, and road networks that allowed high-altitude populations to thrive. Administration was centralized, using tools like the quipu to track resources, populations, and labor obligations. These societies highlight the ingenuity of civilizations that developed independently of Eurasian influences, demonstrating the diversity of human adaptation and organization. Maritime trade and exploration were pivotal in connecting medieval societies. Indian Ocean networks linked East Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, India, Southeast Asia, and China. Monsoon winds facilitated predictable travel, enabling merchants to transport spices, textiles, precious metals, and cultural practices across thousands of kilometers. These trade routes were also vectors of knowledge. Mathematics, astronomy, navigation, religion, and technology spread along with goods. In essence, the medieval world was interconnected, forming early networks of globalization centuries before Europe's age of exploration. Intellectual and religious networks reinforced social cohesion and cross-cultural exchange. Islamic scholarship preserved Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian medicine. Buddhist and Hindu teachings traveled from India to East and Southeast Asia. African and Mesoamerican oral traditions preserved history, law, and cultural memory. Knowledge was not static. It evolved, adapted, and spread across continents, ensuring that civilizations could innovate while remaining anchored to their traditions. Libraries, monasteries, observatories, and schools served as nodes in these networks, linking communities across time and space. Environmental adaptation remained central to medieval survival. Irrigation in the Nile Valley and Mesopotamia, terrace farming in the Andes, monsoon-dependent navigation in the Indian Ocean, and agroforestry in the Pacific Islands reflect society's ability to manage resources sustainably. Urban planning in European, Chinese, and African cities integrated water management, marketplaces, administrative centers, and religious institutions, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of both local and regional ecological systems. Civilizations thrived when environmental knowledge was combined with technological innovation and social coordination. Conflict, migration, and cultural interaction shaped medieval civilizations. Empires and kingdoms expanded through conquest, but they also assimilated local populations, ideas, and technologies. The spread of Islam integrated diverse peoples under shared legal, cultural, and religious frameworks. The Mongol Empire connected Eurasia, facilitating unprecedented movement of goods, knowledge, and people. European crusades and trade expeditions brought new commodities, ideas, and diseases into circulation. These interactions highlight a critical principle. Civilization is dynamic, interconnected, and adaptive, not static or isolated. Daily life in the medieval period reflected this complexity. Farmers produced food, artisans manufactured goods, merchants engaged in local and long-distance trade, and scholars preserved and expanded knowledge. Ritual, religion, and cultural practices structured labor, social hierarchy, and education. The interplay of local and imperial systems, urban and rural communities, and practical and intellectual pursuits created a world both fragile and resilient. Civilizations survived not merely through conquest, but through cooperation, innovation, and the transmission of knowledge. In conclusion, the medieval era demonstrates that global interactions, intellectual networks, and environmental adaptation sustained vibrant civilizations across continents. Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas were linked by trade, religion, knowledge, and cultural exchange, each contributing uniquely to human development. Mischaracterizing this period as dark obscures the achievements of diverse societies that produced law, literature, art, science, and infrastructure. Civilizations flourished through adaptability, interconnectedness, and the cumulative efforts of countless individuals. The medieval world teaches that human progress is neither linear nor Eurocentric. Trade, scholarship, religion, and governance are intertwined to produce resilient, dynamic societies. Knowledge traveled with merchants and pilgrims, while ideas, technology, and ritual shaped both local and regional life. By studying this era in a global context, we understand the medieval period as a critical bridge between ancient civilizations and the modern world, laying the foundations for cultural, intellectual, and technological networks that continue to influence humanity today. By the 14th century, Europe experienced a transformation that would reverberate across the globe. Known as the Renaissance, this period was marked by renewed interest in classical knowledge, artistic innovation, scientific inquiry, and intellectual exploration. Yet it was not a phenomenon confined to Europe alone. It intersected with the legacies of Islamic, African, and Asian civilizations, which preserved and advanced knowledge through centuries of intellectual continuity. The Renaissance catalyzed exploration, trade, and eventually the colonization of distant lands, processes that reshaped human civilization on a planetary scale. In Europe, the rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman texts, which were often preserved and translated by scholars in the Islamic world, sparked a revolution in art, science, and philosophy. Figures such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Galileo, and Machiavelli combined observation, experimentation, and critical thought to challenge established ideas and expand human understanding. Cities such as Florence, Venice, and Paris became hubs of patronage, scholarship, and trade, where artisans, merchants, and intellectuals collaborated in unprecedented ways. Humanism, the philosophical cornerstone of the Renaissance, emphasized the value of individual experience, empirical observation, and the potential of human creativity, laying the foundation for modern science and secular governance. Simultaneously, European powers began to look beyond their borders, driven by trade, curiosity, and the search for wealth and resources. The age of exploration emerged as ships crossed the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, connecting continents in ways previously unimaginable. Portugal and Spain led early voyages, navigating around Africa to India, crossing the Atlantic to the Americas, and establishing networks of trade and conquest. These journeys were made possible by technological advances, astrolabes, compasses, improved shipbuilding, and the cumulative knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and navigation, much of it transmitted from Islamic, Indian, and Chinese scholars. Exploration brought Europeans into contact with societies across the globe, from the Americas to Africa and Asia. Indigenous civilizations, including the Aztec, Inca, and diverse North American and Caribbean societies, faced dramatic disruptions as European conquest and colonization spread. Disease decimated populations, while forced labor, displacement, and cultural suppression altered the social fabric of countless communities. Yet these encounters were not one-sided. Knowledge, crops, animals, and technologies moved in both directions. The Columbian Exchange, as it came to be known, redistributed maize, potatoes, cacao, and tomatoes from the Americas to Eurasia and Africa, while wheat, cattle, and horses were introduced to the New World, transforming agriculture, diets, and economies globally. Africa played a pivotal role in these interactions, both as a source of trade goods and through the forced migration of enslaved people. The transatlantic slave trade, beginning in the 15th century, became a cornerstone of colonial economies, linking African labor to European colonies in the Americas. At the same time, African societies continued to innovate and interact with global trade networks. West African gold, ivory, textiles, and salt remained integral to international commerce, while cultural and intellectual traditions persisted despite external pressures. Asia was also deeply enmeshed in global interactions. The Indian Ocean Trade Network connected India, Southeast Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and China. Merchants transported spices, silk, textiles, and precious metals across thousands of kilometers. Islamic, Hindu, and Buddhist knowledge, technology, and cultural practices traversed these routes, influencing European explorers who encountered these sophisticated societies. China, under the Ming Dynasty, had previously conducted expeditions led by Admiral Zheng He, projecting power, establishing tributary relations, and demonstrating mastery of maritime navigation, shipbuilding, and diplomatic organization long before European dominance. The Renaissance and subsequent age of exploration underscore a critical lesson. Civilization is cumulative, interconnected, and shaped by cross-cultural exchange. European achievements in art, science, and navigation were built upon knowledge preserved and transmitted from Africa, the Islamic world, India, and China. Colonization and conquest, while transformative and often destructive, also facilitated the movement of ideas, crops, technologies, and people across continents, creating the foundations of a truly globalized human society. Colonization introduced profound inequalities and systemic exploitation. Indigenous populations were displaced, enslaved, or annihilated. European powers extracted wealth and resources on an unprecedented scale. Yet these traumatic encounters also gave rise to cultural hybridity. African, European, and indigenous American societies interacted to create new languages, religions, artistic forms, and social structures. The Atlantic world became a laboratory of human adaptation, resilience, and cultural synthesis, reflecting the enduring capacity of societies to reorganize and survive under extreme conditions. Scientific and intellectual developments continued to accelerate. The printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, allowed texts to be reproduced and disseminated widely, breaking the monopoly of knowledge held by elites and religious institutions. Maps, navigational charts, and astronomical treatises circulated among scholars and explorers, facilitating further voyages and the refinement of global understanding. Mathematics, cartography, and experimental science enabled not only European expansion, but also the long-term accumulation of knowledge critical to modern civilization. Religious dynamics played a central role during this era. The Protestant Reformation, Catholic Counter-Reformation, and global missionary movements reshaped belief systems and social organization. European religious conflicts were intertwined with political power struggles, while overseas missionary efforts spread Christianity across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Indigenous belief systems, despite suppression, persisted and syncretized with imported religious frameworks, resulting in rich cultural and spiritual landscapes that remain visible today. Daily life, commerce, and urban development were transformed by these global interactions. European cities expanded in wealth and complexity, fueled by trade and exploration. Colonial ports emerged as nodes of commerce, migration, and cultural exchange, linking continents through shipping routes. Merchants, artisans, and laborers engaged in increasingly sophisticated economic systems, while information, techniques, and cultural practices moved alongside commodities. These changes illustrate the interplay of local experience and global forces, showing how human civilization adapts to scale, diversity, and opportunity. Environmental impact also intensified. European colonization and industrial-scale agriculture reshaped landscapes, introduced new species, and altered ecosystems across continents. The spread of crops, livestock, and monocultures transformed diets, labor systems, and land use globally. These ecological consequences foreshadowed challenges that would become central to the modern era, demonstrating that human ingenuity carries both creation and destruction. In conclusion, the Renaissance, exploration, and colonization period reveals the dual nature of human civilization. Remarkable creativity and knowledge expansion intertwined with disruption, exploitation, and cultural transformation. Europe's intellectual revival cannot be understood in isolation. It was part of a broader human story of cumulative knowledge, trade, and cross-cultural engagement. Exploration connected continents, reshaping economies, societies, and environments, while colonization forged new global inequalities and cultural syntheses. The enduring lesson of this era is that human civilization thrives through exchange, innovation, and adaptability, yet is vulnerable to exploitation and imbalance. The Renaissance exemplifies the power of knowledge, creativity, and observation. The age of exploration demonstrates the capacity for global interconnection. Colonization underscores both the destructive and generative consequences of cultural encounters. Together, these forces set the stage for the Industrial Revolution, the transformation of global societies, and the interconnected modern world we inhabit today. By the late 18th century, the world entered a transformative era known as the Industrial Revolution, a period that would fundamentally reshape economies, societies, and human interactions with the environment. While often associated with Britain, industrialization was part of a global tapestry of technological, social, and economic change, influenced by centuries of accumulated knowledge, trade, and innovation from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The Industrial Revolution was not merely a story of machines. It was a story of human ambition, adaptation, exploitation, and ingenuity, leaving consequences that continue to shape the modern world. The Industrial Revolution began with innovations in textile production, metallurgy, and energy harnessing. Water and steam power transformed mills, spinning machines, and ironworks. Coal became the lifeblood of industrial economies, fueling locomotives, factories, and urban centers. These technological advancements multiplied productivity, enabling unprecedented economic growth, but also concentrated wealth and power in the hands of industrial capitalists. Cities expanded rapidly, drawing migrants from rural areas in search of work, fundamentally altering social structures, family life, and urban landscapes. Mechanization changed not only production but also labor relations and societal organization. Factory work demanded regimented schedules, repetitive tasks, and new forms of discipline, disrupting traditional crafts and agrarian lifestyles. Child labor, long hours, and hazardous conditions characterized early industrial societies, highlighting the human cost of technological progress. Workers organized strikes, unions, and political movements to demand rights and protections, reflecting the tension between innovation and human welfare that industrialization unleashed across continents. Globalization accelerated during this period, linking resource extraction, production, and markets. Colonized regions supplied raw materials such as cotton, rubber, metals, and sugar, fueling industrial economies in Europe and North America. Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and the Americas were incorporated into global supply chains, often through coercion, exploitation, and violence. Indigenous knowledge, labor, and natural resources were instrumental in sustaining industrial growth, underscoring that the wealth generated by industrialization was deeply interconnected with colonial networks and systemic inequalities. Scientific and technological progress expanded beyond factories. Advancements in chemistry, physics, medicine, and engineering enabled new methods of production, improved public health, and transformed infrastructure. Railways, canals, and telegraph networks connected cities, nations, and continents, enabling the movement of goods, ideas, and people at unprecedented speeds. Innovations in agriculture, such as mechanized plows and fertilizers, increased yields, supported growing urban populations, and enabled global population expansion. Industrialization was thus not merely a European or Western phenomenon, but a global process shaped by diverse contributions and environmental adaptation. Urbanization reshaped human settlement patterns. Cities such as Manchester, London, and Chicago grew from modest towns into industrial metropolises. Housing, sanitation, and public health struggled to keep pace with rapid population growth, leading to epidemics, poverty, and social unrest. Yet these urban centers also became hubs of cultural innovation, education, and political organization. Literature, newspapers, and public institutions proliferated, reflecting a new social consciousness and the democratization of information. Across continents, Urbanization fostered interconnected societies capable of rapid communication, collaboration, and collective action. Industrialization also transformed gender roles and family structures. Women increasingly participated in factory labor, domestic service, and education, challenging traditional norms and catalyzing early feminist movements. Education reform, literacy expansion, and civic engagement began to reshape societies, laying the foundation for more inclusive political and social systems. The Industrial Revolution thus altered not only production but the very fabric of human communities, creating opportunities and challenges that continue to reverberate in the modern era. Environmental impact was profound. Coal mining, deforestation, urban pollution, and mechanized agriculture altered landscapes, air quality, and ecosystems. Rivers and forests were reshaped to meet the demands of industry and population growth. Industrial societies confronted the dual reality of progress and environmental cost, a tension that continues to define human interaction with nature. These challenges demonstrated that technological innovation carries both transformative potential and ecological responsibility, a lesson humanity continues to grapple with today. Global trade networks expanded dramatically. Industrial production required raw materials from Africa, Asia, and the Americas, while manufactured goods were exported worldwide. Steamships and railways facilitated faster, larger-scale movement of commodities. Colonial powers profited from these networks, establishing economic dominance through control of production, labor, and markets. Simultaneously, knowledge of engineering, navigation, and logistics was disseminated across continents, reinforcing the principle that industrialization was both a technological and cultural phenomenon, dependent on human ingenuity and global exchange. Cultural transformation paralleled technological and economic change. Literature, art, music, and philosophy responded to industrialization, reflecting both optimism and critique. Romanticism celebrated nature and human emotion in response to mechanized societies, while social theorists like Marx and Engels analyzed inequalities, labor exploitation, and the dynamics of capitalist industrial economies. Education systems expanded to train engineers, technicians, and administrators, embedding knowledge networks that sustained industrial societies and enabled further innovation. The Industrial Revolution also set the stage for political upheaval and social reform. Urban working classes demanded representation, labor rights, and social welfare. Nationalism and revolutionary movements reshaped political boundaries and ideologies. The uneven distribution of industrial benefits created tensions that would fuel conflicts, revolutions, and global transformations in the 19th and 20th centuries. Industrialization was thus inseparable from politics, culture, and social organization, illustrating the intertwined nature of human civilization. In non-Western contexts, industrialization manifested differently, but was no less transformative. Japan's Meiji Restoration exemplified deliberate modernization, combining Western technology with indigenous governance and cultural traditions to rapidly industrialize and centralize the state. In parts of India, Africa, and Southeast Asia, colonial infrastructures facilitated resource extraction, trade, and the introduction of mechanized industry, often reshaping societies while imposing new hierarchies and economic dependencies. These examples illustrate that industrialization was a global phenomenon, characterized by adaptation, resistance, and local agency, not merely a European export. In conclusion, the Industrial Revolution and modernization period exemplify the complexity of human civilization. Technological innovation, urbanization, global trade, and environmental transformation reshaped societies worldwide. Industrialization was both a product of accumulated human knowledge and a catalyst for new forms of inequality, adaptation, and social organization. It demonstrates that human civilization advances through a combination of creativity, collaboration, exploitation, and resilience. The lessons of this era are enduring. Societies survive and thrive by leveraging knowledge, adapting to new technologies, and negotiating the consequences of expansion and transformation. Industrialization was not an endpoint, but a bridge linking agrarian, mercantile, and pre-modern societies to the challenges and possibilities of the 20th and 21st centuries. It laid the foundation for the modern world: global connectivity, technological innovation, urbanization, environmental awareness, and the ongoing struggle to balance human ambition with ethical and ecological responsibility. The 20th century emerged as an era of unprecedented upheaval, conflict, and transformation, reshaping human civilization on a scale unmatched in previous centuries. Empires collapsed, new nations were born, ideologies clashed, and societies confronted both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human cruelty. Wars, revolutions, and global transformations redefined politics, economies, and cultures, leaving legacies that continue to shape the modern world. This period demonstrates that civilization is not a linear narrative of progress, but a complex interplay of innovation, conflict, adaptation, and resilience. The century opened with the First World War, 1914 to 1918, a cataclysm born of industrialized militarism, national rivalries, and colonial competition. Millions perished in trench warfare, while entire societies were mobilized for total war. The conflict demonstrated the destructive potential of industrial technology. Machine guns, tanks, chemical weapons, and artillery reshaped battlefields, while logistical and economic systems were harnessed to support unprecedented armies. Beyond Europe, colonial soldiers fought in foreign lands, contributing to the war effort while sowing seeds of nationalist movements that would challenge imperial rule in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The aftermath of the First World War catalyzed revolutions and ideological experimentation. The Russian Revolution, 1917, overthrew the centuries-old Tsarist autocracy, establishing the first socialist state. Marxist ideas, adapted to Russian circumstances, inspired political movements worldwide, challenging capitalist, colonial, and monarchical systems. The interwar period saw both innovation and instability. Technological advancement in aviation, communication, and industry coexisted with economic collapse, hyperinflation, and social unrest, setting the stage for global conflict once again. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945, amplified the scale and complexity of global conflict. Technological innovation, code breaking, and nuclear weapons redefined military strategy, while total war mobilized civilian populations on an unprecedented scale. Ideologies collided. Fascism, democracy, communism, and imperialism clashed in a global struggle that spanned continents. The Holocaust, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the widespread destruction of cities illustrate the extremes of human ambition and cruelty. Simultaneously, anti-fascist resistance movements, humanitarian efforts, and technological ingenuity revealed the capacity for resilience, solidarity, and innovation. Colonial empires were irrevocably altered by the wars. Europe's exhaustion, combined with the ideological momentum of self-determination, accelerated decolonization across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. India achieved independence from Britain in 1947, Indonesia from the Netherlands in 1949, and countless African nations followed through the mid-20th century. These transitions reshaped global governance, economic systems, and cultural identities, revealing that the legacies of colonialism were intertwined with modern revolutions, nation-building, and global realignments. The Cold War, 1947 to 1991, created a bipolar global order, pitting the United States and the Soviet Union against each other in a struggle of ideology, technology, and influence. Nuclear weapons introduced existential stakes, while proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan demonstrated the reach of global ideological conflict. Space exploration, computer technology, and telecommunications advanced rapidly during this period, illustrating that competition and conflict often accelerate innovation. The Cold War also highlighted interconnectedness. Economic aid, cultural exchange, espionage, and diplomacy intertwined to shape global society, reflecting a world where no nation could exist in isolation. Social revolutions during the 20th century transformed civil rights, gender roles, and cultural norms. Movements for racial equality, women's suffrage, and labor rights reshaped societies in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. These transformations challenged entrenched hierarchies, redistributed power, and expanded participation in governance and economic life. Education, mass media, and urbanization amplified these movements, demonstrating the capacity of global communication networks to influence social change. Technological progress fundamentally altered daily life. Electrification, automobiles, telephones, radio, television, computers, and eventually the internet transformed economies, communication, and culture. Health innovations, vaccines, antibiotics, public sanitation, reduced mortality, and increased life expectancy are reshaping demographics and labor markets. Cities expanded vertically and horizontally. Transportation networks knitted regions together, and industrial and service economies redefined livelihoods. Humanity's capacity to manipulate energy, information, and materials reached new heights. But these advancements were inseparable from the political, social, and environmental consequences of human action. Environmental transformation accelerated alongside industrial and technological progress. Fossil fuel consumption, deforestation, urbanization, and industrial agriculture altered landscapes, climate systems, and biodiversity. The 20th century demonstrates that human civilization's reach has ecological consequences, requiring governance, innovation, and international cooperation to mitigate impacts. Global transformations, wars, revolutions, and industrialization cannot be separated from their environmental contexts. Each influenced patterns of settlement, migration, and economic development. Global economic integration expanded through international trade, multinational corporations, and financial networks. Post-World War II institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund sought to stabilize economies, prevent conflict, and coordinate development. While these structures facilitated growth, they also perpetuated inequalities and dependence, illustrating that global governance is both an instrument of stability and a reflection of historical power dynamics. Cultural transformation was equally profound. Mass media, film, literature, music, and sports became vehicles for shared experience and identity, connecting societies across continents. Scientific understanding, from quantum mechanics to space exploration, reshaped human conceptions of the universe. Philosophy, ethics, and religion responded to new challenges: nuclear deterrence, technological ethics, and human rights. The 20th century demonstrates that human civilization is simultaneously technological, political, cultural, and moral, with progress measured across multiple dimensions. Every individual in this era participated, in some measure, in the global narrative. Soldiers, workers, students, farmers, scientists, activists, and artists collectively shaped the trajectory of societies. The century's transformations illustrate the interplay between large-scale forces, war, empire, economy, and everyday human action. Civilization is not an abstract concept. It is the sum of countless decisions, innovations, and adaptations, each influencing the next generation and the broader human story. In conclusion, The 20th century demonstrates that wars, revolutions, and global transformations are not merely historical events, but processes that reshape human civilization in enduring ways. Empires fell, nations emerged, ideologies clashed, and technology accelerated change, linking societies across continents. The period underscores a central truth. Human history is contingent, interconnected, and profoundly shaped by the tension between destruction and creation, conflict and collaboration, exploitation and innovation. The legacies of this era, modern nation-states, global trade networks, technological infrastructure, cultural exchange, and social movement, continue to define the 21st century. Understanding this period is essential to grasping the trajectory of human civilization, the enduring consequences of global interaction, and the ongoing responsibility to navigate innovation, governance, and ethical challenges with foresight and humanity. The story of the 20th century is a story of both caution and inspiration, demonstrating that civilization's survival depends on resilience, adaptability, and the collective efforts of humanity. The 20th century emerged as an era of unprecedented upheaval, conflict, and transformation, reshaping human civilization on a scale unmatched in previous centuries. Empires collapsed, new nations were born, ideologies clashed, and societies confronted both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human cruelty. Wars, revolutions, and global transformations redefined politics, economies, and cultures, leaving legacies that continue to shape the modern world. This period demonstrates that civilization is not a linear narrative of progress, but a complex interplay of innovation, conflict, adaptation, and resilience. The century opened with the First World War, 1914 to 1918, a cataclysm born of industrialized militarism, national rivalries, and colonial competition. Millions perished in trench warfare, while entire societies were mobilized for total war. The conflict demonstrated the destructive potential of industrial technology. Machine guns, tanks, chemical weapons, and artillery reshaped battlefields, while logistical and economic systems were harnessed to support unprecedented armies. Beyond Europe, colonial soldiers fought in foreign lands, contributing to the war effort while sowing seeds of nationalist movements that would challenge imperial rule in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The aftermath of the First World War catalyzed revolutions and ideological experimentation. The Russian Revolution, 1917, overthrew the centuries-old Tsarist autocracy, establishing the first socialist state. Marxist ideas, adapted to Russian circumstances, inspired political movements worldwide, challenging capitalist, colonial, and monarchical systems. The interwar period saw both innovation and instability. Technological advancement in aviation, communication, and industry coexisted with economic collapse, hyperinflation, and social unrest, setting the stage for global conflict once again. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945, amplified the scale and complexity of global conflict. Technological innovation, code-breaking, and nuclear weapons redefined military strategy, while total war mobilized civilian populations on an unprecedented scale. Ideologies collided. Fascism, democracy, communism, and imperialism clashed in a global struggle that spanned continents. The Holocaust, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the widespread destruction of cities illustrate the extremes of human ambition and cruelty. Simultaneously, anti-fascist resistance movements, humanitarian efforts, and technological ingenuity revealed the capacity for resilience, solidarity, and innovation. The 20th century amplified these dynamics exponentially. Wars, revolutions, and global transformations, 2 world wars, the Cold War, decolonization, civil rights movements, and technological revolutions remade borders, ideologies, and societies. Humans confronted the extremes of ambition and cruelty, while simultaneously demonstrating resilience, solidarity, and creativity. The century revealed that civilization is contingent. Political, technological, and social systems can advance human potential or magnify human suffering. Global integration, accelerated communication, and technological innovation reshaped human interdependence, while environmental degradation, inequality, and ethical dilemmas emerged as central concerns for the future. Entering the digital age, humanity faces new frontiers. The internet, artificial intelligence, global networks, and technological innovation expand capabilities while presenting ethical, social, and environmental challenges. Climate change, resource scarcity, geopolitical tension, and technological disruption require global cooperation, foresight, and adaptability. The 21st century demonstrates that knowledge, innovation, and ethical governance are inseparable. Civilization thrives when information, technology, and policy are used responsibly, equitably, and sustainably. The patterns of past millennia, adaptation, resilience, cooperation, and innovation remain essential in navigating these challenges. Throughout this vast sweep of history, a persistent theme emerges. Human civilization is a collective endeavor, shaped not solely by rulers, empires, or elites, but by the countless lives, decisions, and innovations of ordinary people. Farmers, artisans, merchants, scholars, navigators, soldiers, and thinkers, every individual contributes to the unfolding narrative. Each choice, each adaptation, each act of creativity or survival becomes a thread in the tapestry of civilization. From stone tools to AI algorithms, from river valley settlements to megacities, the story of humanity is a story of cumulative innovation, shared knowledge, and adaptation to ever-changing environmental and social conditions. Civilization is also a story of risk, failure, and recovery. Empires rise and fall, cities flourish and collapse, ideas evolve, and ecosystems transform. Yet humans repeatedly demonstrate the capacity to learn, adapt, and rebuild. History teaches that survival is not guaranteed by wealth, technology, or power alone. It depends on the resilience, cooperation, and creativity of societies, on the ability to navigate uncertainty, mitigate risk, and leverage knowledge collectively. This lesson remains crucial as humanity confronts global challenges in the 21st century. In reflecting on the totality of human history from the first sparks of toolmaking in Africa to the monumental achievements of classical empires, the transformative power of industrialization, the upheavals of war and revolution, and the complex networks of the digital age, one truth becomes clear. Every civilization is a continuum, every society a chapter in a shared story, every individual a participant in shaping the trajectory of humanity. Our modern world is both a product of millennia of innovation, struggle, and exchange, and a precursor to futures yet imagined. Thus, the history of human civilization is not merely a chronicle of kings, empires, or technological milestones. It is a reflection of collective human experience, revealing how adaptation, cooperation, creativity, and resilience have allowed societies to survive, flourish, and transform across time and space. From ancient river valleys to the digital networks of today, civilization is the ongoing interplay of human endeavor and environmental reality, shaped by knowledge, culture, and the choices of countless generations. The conclusion of this journey is not an ending but an invitation to understand, reflect, and participate. To study the past is to gain insight into the patterns of adaptation, innovation, and resilience that have defined humanity. To act in the present is to shape the trajectory of civilization for future generations. Every decision, every technological innovation, every act of creativity or compassion contributes to the living, evolving story of human civilization. In synthesizing this history, we recognize that the human story is global, interconnected, and cumulative. Achievements in art, science, governance, and culture cannot be understood in isolation. They are the product of millennia of interaction, exchange, and adaptation. Civilizations do not exist in isolation, and the triumphs or failures of one society reverberate across continents and generations. Humanity's survival and flourishing have always depended on learning from the past, adapting to the present, and planning for the future. As we stand at the intersection of history, technology, and global interdependence, the story of human civilization offers both inspiration and warning. It reminds us that progress is possible, that knowledge and creativity are powerful tools, and that resilience and cooperation are essential to navigating complexity. Yet it also cautions that hubris, exploitation, and neglect of ethical and environmental imperatives carry consequences that can echo for generations. The human journey is ongoing, a testament to both our potential and our responsibility. In the end, civilization is the sum of human choices, actions, and knowledge, a tapestry woven from the countless lives that have preceded us and the countless more that will follow. It is a story of adaptation, innovation, resilience, and connection, stretching from the dawn of humanity to the frontiers of the digital age. And as we participate in this continuum, we are reminded that every life, every society, and every decision contributes to the unfolding history of human civilization, shaping the future even as we are shaped by the past. From the countless lives that have preceded us and the countless more that will follow. It is a story of adaptation, innovation, resilience, and connection, stretching from the dawn of humanity to the frontiers of the digital age. And as we participate in this continuum,